In the far north, where the world narrows between fjord and sky, where long winters grind the edges of time, men and women once believed that dreams were not mere shadows of thought but journeys. To sleep was to step out of one's own body, to drift into the realms where spirits spoke and gods watched from behind veils of frost. The Vikings, the Norsemen of the early medieval age, carried a deep fear and reverence for what the mind did in darkness. To them, the dream was not illusion. It was revelation or warning. Their world was alive with unseen forces. The air itself had will, the sea had moods, the forest whispered with hidden life. Nothing in their world existed without spirit. Even a sword could have memory, and a stone could bear witness. So it was only natural that the human soul, too, was restless and divided. The Norse spoke of the hugr, the inner self that thought, willed, and felt, and of the hammer, the shape or image of the person, capable of leaving the sleeping body and traveling far. When you slept, your hammer might walk into another world, crossing into dream landscapes that were as real as waking ones. And yet, that freedom was dangerous. Because the hammer could wander, it could also be trapped, harmed, or stolen. A bad dream was not dismissed as a trick of the brain but feared as an attack. The dream could wound you in spirit, and that wand could show itself in your waking flesh. Many sagas tell of men who woke from terrible dreams and soon fell ill, as if the sickness had crossed the invisible line between the two worlds. Sleep, therefore, was not rest, it was risk. The Viking did not dream safely. In the dim interiors of their longhouses, people slept close together for warmth. The smoke of the hearth lingered in the rafters, and the wind hissed at the door. Outside, wolves howled and the aurora flickered green and white across the sky, omens, perhaps, of the gods' shifting moods. In that half-lit silence, when the breath of the sea was far away and the world seemed to pause, dreams came. Some were soft, a vision of a dead friend smiling, or a boat returning home with full sails. Others were hard and cruel, burning villages, dark rivers, beasts with men's faces. It was said that Odin himself, the god of wisdom and war, sent dreams. But Odin was a deceiver as much as a teacher. He granted visions to chosen seers. Yes, but he also planted false dreams to lead mortals to ruin. To receive a dream was to be touched by something divine, yet that touch could sear. A man might wake shaking, not knowing whether he had been blessed or cursed. The Norse mind was shaped by fatalism. They believed in word, or fate, the unchangeable pattern woven by the Norns, the three sisters who spun the threads of all lives. Dreams were seen as glimpses of that pattern, sudden openings into what was already ordained. To see the future in a dream was not a gift to be used, but a burden to bear, for what you saw could not be undone. To dream of your own death was to begin living in its shadow. Even the sagas, those long proud stories of warriors and wanderers, are threaded with the dread of dreams. In Gisla Saga, the outlaw Gisla is haunted by two women who come to him in sleep, one kind, one cruel. The good dream wife brings comfort, the other brings terror. He knows they are not figments, but spirits, sent from beyond to test him. Each night he wrestles with them, and each morning he wakes closer to his doom. The sagas do not laugh at this, they treat it as fact. In the Viking world, the boundary between dream and waking was a membrane so thin it could tear with a sigh. The Norse did not separate the mind from the soul, nor the soul from the world. A dream was a voyage of the hugr, a real crossing into other layers of existence. The gods had their halls, the elves their fields, the dead their grave mounds, and the dreamer, for a few hours, might walk among them all. But the danger was this: one could lose the way home. There are tales of dreamers who never woke, whose bodies stayed cold while their spirits wandered forever. It was not only men who feared dreams. Women, often regarded as closer to the spirit world, were both sought and shunned for their power to interpret them. The Vailva, or seeress, could read the meaning of dreams as others read runes. She could tell when a dream was a message from the ancestors or a trick of the Draugr, the restless dead who envied the living. But she, too, paid a price. The old poems whisper that to see too much of the dream realm was to lose part of one's sanity. The gift of sight came always with a shadow. In those northern lands, winter nights stretched long and heavy. Dreams multiplied in the darkness. People told them to one another at dawn by the fire, while the frost glistened on the beams. Some laughed them off, but others fell silent, for they knew that dreams could bind as strongly as oaths. If someone dreamed of your death, you listened. You did not dismiss it. You offered gifts to the gods or charms to ward the evil away. A common charm against bad dreams was the placing of an iron knife near the bed or a piece of rowan wood, a tree sacred for its protective power. Mothers traced runes on the doorposts to keep the Mara, the nightmare spirit, from pressing on their children's chests as they slept. They whispered prayers to Thor or to Freya to guard their hammer as it wandered. Sleep was a battlefield, and one went to it armed. Yet, for all their fear, the Vikings could not turn away from the dream's call. They saw in it the language of the hidden world, the echo of something larger than themselves. In dream one might meet a god or glimpse Valhalla, or see the face of a loved one lost to the sea. The dream was terror, yes, but also contact. To deny it was to deny the very pulse of the cosmos. Thus, every Viking lived with this paradox. They feared their dreams, yet depended on them. Kings sought dream interpreters before great battles. Farmers looked for signs of weather or fate in their sleep. Wives dreamed of husbands gone to war and woke knowing whether they lived or died. The dream was a message no one could ignore. As centuries passed, and Christianity began to whisper through the north, this fear did not fade. It only changed its shape. The gods became saints. The spirits became demons, but the belief that dreams held power remained. To close one's eyes was still to risk opening a door. Imagine it now. The flicker of firelight against the beams of a longhouse. A man lies down, wrapped in furs. He listens to the wind moving through the cracks in the wood. He breathes deeply, eyes heavy, the day's labor still aching in his muscles. Around him, others sleep. The oxen shift outside. Snow falls softly on the roof. Slowly, the border thins. In his mind, he sees a figure standing by the fjord, a tall man cloaked in gray, one eye gleaming like ice. The man says nothing, only raises his hand. Behind him, a black ship glides across a sea of stars. The dreamer's heart pounds. He tries to call out, but no sound comes. The ship passes, and as it does, he feels a cold wind strike his face. He wakes gasping, frost on his lips, the echo of waves still in his ears. He knows what it means. By dawn, he will begin preparing for a journey he has not yet planned. He will not speak of the dream aloud, but it will guide him more surely than any map. For in the north, to dream is to be chosen, and to be chosen is to be afraid. When the Norse closed their eyes, they did not believe they merely drifted into imagination. They believed that a part of themselves, something subtle, bright, and dangerous, left the body to roam the 9 worlds. The Hugr and the hammer were not metaphors to them. They were facts of existence, the unseen architecture of being. The body was only the vessel. The true self could slip beyond its walls and walk the hidden roads of the night. In the sagas and the Eddas, there are many names for what might depart during sleep. The Hugr was the mind soul, the will that could send thoughts and emotions far from the flesh. The hammer was the shape, the image, the spirit form that could change or travel. A gifted person, a seeress, a warrior, a witch might send out their hammer even while awake, riding upon wind or mist to spy on enemies or seek knowledge from the realms beyond. But when ordinary men and women slept, the hammer wandered by nature. It was its right. It went where it was drawn, toward ancestors, toward fate, toward danger. In that wandering lay both wisdom and peril. The Norse had no word for unconscious, as we use it. To them, every dream was an event, a happening, a crossing. The soul might rise from the sleeping form like steam from a hot spring and drift through the house. Some claimed to see such vapors in the lamplight flickering, silver-white shapes curling toward the roof beams before vanishing through the smoke hole. Others said that, when one slept too deeply, the hammer could become lost in the paths between worlds, unable to find its way back before dawn. To understand this fear, one must remember how the Vikings imagined the cosmos. The world they knew was not alone. It was one of 9 realms, all bound together by Yggdrasil, the world tree. Beneath their feet lay the roots of Hel, realm of the dead. Above, the branches touched Asgard, home of the gods. Between stretched the lands of men, elves, dwarfs, and giants. The soul in sleep could travel along the hidden roots and branches of that tree, carried by unseen winds, drawn by forces it could neither resist nor comprehend. Some nights, the journey was gentle. Others, it was terrible. It was said that one might meet the fjords there, the following spirit, often in the shape of an animal, that reflected a person's true nature. A warrior's fjord might appear as a wolf or bear, a woman's as a swan or fox. The fjord could warn of coming death or fortune. If it turned away from you the dream, your time was near. And so, a man might wake sweating, unable to shake the image of a wolf padding silently into the woods, never once looking back. The fjord could also wander into other people's dreams. The sagas speak of dream visitations where one soul crosses into another's sleep to deliver messages, or to harm. Enemies might curse you by sending their fjord to sit upon your chest, to whisper madness, or to draw away your strength. The word nightmare itself echoes this old belief. The Mara, a shadowy creature or soul that pressed upon sleepers, leaving them gasping for breath. Not all Mara were demons. Sometimes they were simply human souls that had lost their way. Because of these beliefs, sleep was guarded. Doors were barred not only against wolves and raiders, but against wandering spirits. Firelight was kept low to confuse them. Charms were carved into the lintel. Iron was placed near the head of the bed to anchor the soul to the body, for iron was sacred and strong, a metal that could not be deceived by elves or draugr. In some households, a family member kept watch during the first hours of the night, listening to the breath of those who slept. If one stirred or spoke, the watcher would murmur prayer, calling the soul back from its travels. The fear of the soul's journey was not cowardice, it was reverence. The Vikings believed that all power carried a double edge. To travel and dream was to touch the divine, and nothing divine was ever safe. Odin himself practiced the magic of mind and spirit that allowed him to wander unseen. Yet even Odin was said to be uneasy in his wanderings. He knew that to go too far was to risk being trapped in the underworld. To return altered, his wisdom bought at the cost of his peace. The sagas of Hamfrir, shaped journeys, tell of men and women whose spirits left their bodies while they slept and took on other forms. Some became whales that hunted in the sea, others birds that spied on distant lands. The most feared were those who became wolves. Such people were called hamramr, strong in shape. They were feared not only in battle but in dreams, for their souls could stalk even the sleeping mind. When a villager dreamed of wolves tearing at his door, he might wake certain that one of his neighbors was the cause, that some witch or warrior had walked in spirit form to torment him. And yet, the Norse also told stories of those whose dream journeys saved lives. A mother whose hammer flew to warn her son of ambush, a seer who walked the roads of hell to plead for the soul of a dead king. Not all travelers were lost. Some returned with knowledge that no waking eye could have seen. The line between fear and reverence was thin. What made one person a nightmare made another a prophet. There are descriptions in old poems of the feeling of leaving one's body, of floating a cold wind, the sound of a roaring sea far away. The sleeper feels themselves rise, weightless, pulled by unseen hands. The body below lies still, pale in the moonlight, yet awareness remains sharp. Sometimes they look down and see themselves. Sometimes they do not look back at all. When the spirit travels too far, the body grows cold. In some sagas, the sleeper found pale and unresponsive is said to be Edvinder, out-wandering. To wake such a person suddenly was dangerous, for the shock might tear the returning soul, leaving the body damaged or mad. Instead, one must wait, whispering their names softly until the hammer hears and returns. If the dawn came, and they did not wake, the household would mourn quietly. They believed the soul had found another world more real than this one. Even the landscapes of dreams reflected the Norse imagination. Mountains of ice, forests of bone, halls of gold and shadow, endless seas. Each dreamscape carried the feeling of distance and threat. Rarely were their dreams soft or tender. The North itself shaped their inner vision. When you live where the sun disappears for months, where death rides with every voyage, your dreams will carry frost. They believed that hell, the realm of the dead, could appear in sleep, not as a punishment but as a reminder. The dead were near, and sometimes they wished to speak. The soul's journey at night was a rehearsal for death. Sleep and death were sisters, the poet said. One borrowed the other's face. To sleep was to practice leaving the body, to prepare for the greater voyage that waited beyond the last breath. This was perhaps the deepest reason Vikings feared their dreams. They were glimpses of what it meant to die, yet they did not flee from them. They listened. They learned. A man who dreamed often was thought to have a strong soul, one capable of walking the unseen paths. The weak dreamed little, the strong walked far. Some even sought ways to control their journeys. They would drink special herbs, henbane, mugwort, or yarrow before sleep, believing these opened the gates of vision. Some fasted to make the soul lighter. The Vailva, the wise woman, would sit by the fire and sing softly to guide her hammer into the spirit world, a practice that later became the heart of Norse magic. Even today, in remote valleys of Iceland and Norway, there are echoes of these old fears. Elders speak of the draugr that come in dreams, of the feeling of a cold weight on the chest, of the sound of footsteps that fade as one wakes. The line between dream and haunting has never fully closed in the North. And so, the Vikings slept as sailors sleep, with one eye open, aware that each night was a voyage across invisible seas. They armed themselves with charms, trusted the strength of their spirits, and accepted the risk. For in their world, knowledge always carried danger, and to know oneself, even in dream, was to sail close to the storm. Outside, the wind moans around the corners of the house. The fire sinks to embers. Somewhere in the dark, the sleeper turns, whispers a name that no one knows. Perhaps it is the name of their Filja. Perhaps it is their own. The breath deepens. The hammer stirs, unfolds like smoke, and slips through the gap in the wall. The journey begins again. When a Viking woke trembling from a dream, the fear did not fade with daylight. Dreams were not dismissed as illusions. They were messages. The gods spoke through them, the dead whispered through them, and fate itself often bared its teeth there. The line between revelation and curse was razor-thin, and every vision had to be read carefully before it came true. You rise from your bed at dawn, the frost crackling on the timber floor, the dream still clinging to you like cobweb. The scent of smoke, the distant cry of ravens, it all feels heavier, darker. You have seen something in the night, and it will not let go. In the North, no one shrugs off such a feeling. The elders gather round the fire to listen, for dreams, they say, are like runes. They speak in riddles, but their truth is sharp as iron. There was a custom among the Old Norse to recount one's dream at sunrise. Words, once spoken aloud, could either bind or break the power of a dream. If a dream was good, telling it ensured it would come to pass. If it was dark, speaking it aloud could drive it away, scattering its poison into the morning mist. This ritual was half prayer, half protection. The Viking mind lived in a world where silence was dangerous. What was unspoken grew in power. Dreams of falling signified the loss of honor or wealth. Dreams of sailing foretold journeys or death. To dream of wolves meant enemies near. To dream of fire meant change or vengeance. But not every vision followed such simple logic. A man who dreamed of his dead father sitting at the hearth might wake to find his wife pregnant, new life born from the shadow of the old. A woman who dreamed of washing blood from her hands might soon lose someone she loved. The sagas are thick with these tales. In Gisli's saga, the hero dreams again and again of two women, one fair, one dark. The fair one brings comfort, the dark one doom. Each dream strikes closer to his death, until he can no longer tell waking from sleeping. To the Norse, this was no madness. It was the weaving of fate tightening around him. In the saga of the Volsungs, Gudrun dreams of a golden hawk that is killed before her eyes, and she wakes weeping. The dream, she later learns, was prophecy her husband's murder. These stories were not fantasy for their listeners. They were reminders. Every dream was a conversation with destiny, and destiny always listened back. The Viking world had no priests to interpret these things. Instead, they turned to the Vaelva, the seeress, the wanderer between worlds. The Vaelva knew the language of symbols, the pathways of the dead, the meanings hidden in firelight and mist. She might sit in silence for hours while a dream was described, then speak a few words that changed everything. Her voice was the bridge between mortal fear and cosmic pattern. She would ask what you had eaten before sleep. Food affected the purity of vision. She would ask what moon hung in the sky, for the waning moon favored warnings, while the waxing moon revealed gifts. Then she would close her eyes, breathe deeply, and listen, not to you, but to what moved behind your words. If the dream came from the hugger, the personal mind, she might dismiss it as mere worry. But if it came from the hammer, the spirit self, then she would grow solemn, for such dreams came from outside, from the gods or the Norns who spin the threads of fate. In such cases, she might offer sacrifice, a few drops of ale to the hearth fire, a lock of hair cast into the wine to balance the forces that had spoken. Sometimes, though, there was no balance to be found. There are tales of men who dreamed of blood and woke to find their kin slain, of women who dreamed of drowning and were lost at sea within the week. These were not coincidences. The Vikings believed that the dream itself might call the event into being. Fear could make it real. The act of seeing was the act of summoning. That is why they feared their own minds. The Norse soul was not a private thing. It was porous, alive, connected to the roots of Yggdrasil. To dream was to dip one's consciousness into the same current that carried the gods and giants. The dreamer was not just a spectator, they were a participant in the cosmic game. And every thought had weight. Even the warriors, fierce and fatalistic, feared certain visions. To dream of one's weapon breaking was a terrible omen, often meaning the gods had withdrawn their favor. To dream of ravens circling overhead was to know that Odin watched and perhaps prepared to claim you for Valhalla. The bravest men went pale at such dreams, though they would never admit it aloud. The sea captains feared the dream of black waves, the farmers the dream of empty fields, the mothers the dream of still cradles. There was no aspect of life untouched by these night visions. A whole system of symbolic lore grew around them, part superstition, part sacred science. To dream of a man without a face was to meet death. To dream of fire that burned cold was a warning from hell. To dream of a door opening meant that something would enter your life, whether fortune or disaster depended on what you saw beyond it. Some tried to outwit their dreams. They slept sitting up, believing the soul would not wander far in that posture. Others wrapped themselves in their cloak and tied it tight with a knot, blessed by a room master, a charm to anchor the spirit. There were even songs, half lullaby, half incantation, sung before bed to seal the mind. But not all feared the shadow realm. Some sought it willingly. The poets, the skalds, believed that dreams were gifts from Odin, the god who traded an eye for wisdom. They drank mead before sleep and prayed for dreams that would grant them verses. They called such dreams Draumur noble dreams. In them, they met the dead kings, the gods, or their own future selves. The price for this inspiration, however, was often a life touched by madness. In the old Icelandic manuscripts, there are entire chapters devoted to the reading of dreams, guides as complex as any book of runes. They warn that no two people share the same symbols, for each person's hammer has its own shape and destiny. What is an omen of death for one might be a promise of glory for another. The only true interpreter of a dream, they said, is the dreamer's soul, but few dared to look that deeply. And so, when a Viking said he feared his dreams, it was not because they were strange or frightening in the ordinary sense. It was because he knew they were real. He knew that what he saw behind closed eyes might already be happening somewhere in the web of the 9 worlds. A dream was a mirror of fate, and fate was unbreakable. As the day brightened, and the world stirred awake, you would carry your dream like a secret wand. You might tell it, or you might not. You might seek the veil, or you might pour another horn of ale and pretend to forget. But deep down, you would know that something had spoken through you in the night, and that, sooner or later, it would come to claim its due. Outside, the wind still carries the cry of ravens. You look up, uncertain whether you hear them in the air or only in your mind. Somewhere between waking and dream, Odin's one eye watches. The Norns spin. The thread tightens. The dream is not over. It has only just begun to unfold. The Vikings believed that the night did not belong solely to the living. Once the sun dipped beneath the horizon and frost began to whisper across the roofs, the world softened, and the boundaries that kept the realms apart loosened. In those hours, both the living soul and the dead spirit moved freely. It was a time of travel, of visitation, and of risk. To sleep was to open a door, and not every visitor was welcome. You lie in your longhouse, the air thick with smoke from the fire pit, your kin asleep beside you. The scent of pine tar and salt lingers on your clothes. Somewhere outside, the dog whimpers, and you remember what the elders say, that dogs see what men cannot. The firelight flickers against the rafters, and in that half-light you think you see movement, a shadow bending where no man stands. You shut your eyes quickly, hoping it is nothing, but already you know the night has begun to breathe. They called them the Draugr, the restless dead. Not ghosts, not quite corpses, but something in between. The Draugr lingered near their burial mounds, heavy with the greed or anger that tied them to the world. Yet sometimes they wandered far from their graves, drawn by hatred or unfinished duty. They came most often in dreams, pressing upon the sleeper like a storm cloud. To dream of a Draugr was to risk waking with frost on your lips and the feeling of weight on your chest. Such dreams were more than superstition. The Norse saw them as a kind of haunting, a visitation of memory and vengeance. A man who had wronged another might wake night after night to see his victim at the foot of his bed. A woman who had not properly mourned her dead husband might feel his cold hand touch her cheek as she slept. These were warnings, demands for honor and ritual. The dead did not fade quietly in the Viking mind. They waited until they were acknowledged. To protect against the Draugr, the living took careful measures. They sealed graves with iron nails and carved runes of binding on the stones. They burned certain herbs in the hearth, juniper, sage, and angelica, to purify the house before nightfall. If a man had died angry, his body might be pierced with a stake or bound with rope, so that his spirit could not walk. These acts were not cruelty, but compassion. They kept the dead in their proper place, allowing the living to sleep in peace. Yet peace was never guaranteed. The sagas speak of men who felt the pull of the mound even while alive, those whose spirits were too close to death. They would dream of the earth opening, of the smell of decay, of pale faces calling from below. Some would wake screaming, clutching at the bedposts, unable to explain what they had seen. Others would not wake at all. Their kin would find them cold at dawn, eyes open, fixed on something invisible. The people would say that the Draugr had claimed them, dragging their hammer into the grave. In those times, a dream could spread like illness. If one member of a household dreamed of the dead, others soon followed. It was believed that the boundary between worlds, once breached, became a pathway. The dreams traveled from mind to mind, like wolves moving through snow, unseen but inevitable. There were also the Maran, the nightmare spirits, who came not as the dead but as shadows of the living. A Mara could be the wandering soul of a woman, perhaps one scorned or sorrowful, who visited sleepers unawares. She would sit upon their chests, pressing the air from their lungs, feeding upon their fear. When the victim woke, gasping, she was already gone, but her presence lingered, heavy as a curse. The old people said that a Mara might be anyone, a neighbor, a friend, even a family member, her Huger roaming without her knowledge. If someone was suspected of being a Mara, they were treated with wary respect. No one accused outright, for such matters were dangerous to speak. Instead, they might leave gifts of bread or milk at her door, to appease the restless part of her spirit. If the nightmares ceased, the debt was considered paid. If not, stronger measures were taken, runes etched into the bed frame, or iron scissors hung above the sleeping place to cut the invisible threads that bound dream to torment. Sleep was not simply rest, it was a battleground. The Viking world was alive with forces both seen and unseen, and the dreamers stood at the center of their struggle. A careless soul could be snared by the dead, attacked by the Mara, or lured away by the spirits of the forest. There are tales of men who followed dream voices into the snow and were never found again, their footprints vanishing halfway across the plain. The people said they had walked into the Huldafox realm, the hidden folk who dwell between waking and dream. And yet, fear was not the only response. There were those who learned to walk the night roads willingly, the dream wanderers, the sire workers, who sought power through the dangers of sleep. They trained themselves to meet the Draugr, to bargain with the dead, to listen without terror. For such people, fear was a teacher. They understood that what haunted others could serve as a guide. To master the dream was to master the self. The process was perilous. The sire workers would lie down on a bearskin, cover themselves with a cloak, and enter a trance through rhythm and chant. The soul, freed from the body, would descend into the shadow realm. There they might speak to ancestors or fetch lost knowledge. But if their will faltered, if they lost sight of the thread that led home, they would wander forever. To lose oneself in dream was a sacred kind of death. The most skilled among them were said to weave dreams for others, sending visions into the minds of kings, warriors, or lovers. A Vailva might send a dream to warn of betrayal, or to make a ruler see what she wished him to see. Such was the depth of their belief that the dream was a real place, a place one could visit, manipulate, and reshape. Still, even the strongest feared the cost. To travel too often between waking and dream was to blur the border. Many Valir lived apart from their people, unable to bear the company of those whose souls still slept soundly. They said the world looked too thin to them, as if everything shimmered with hidden meaning. Sleep brought them no rest, only another crossing. And so, every Viking carried within them a quiet dread of night. The sea could kill, the sword could maim, but the dream could unmake. It could take the strongest man and turn him hollow, haunted by images he could neither deny nor forget. Even now, when archaeologists unearth Viking graves, they sometimes find charms carved with runes of sleep protection, ancient words to keep the Huger safe from wandering too far. One common phrase reads, "Sappho I free, sleep in peace." But in the old tongue, the word peace carried another meaning: wholeness, return, reunion. It was not merely rest that they wished for, but safe passage through the night's dangerous sea. So you lie once more upon your bed of straw, your breath misting in the cold air, your thoughts heavy as stones. You whisper a small prayer to Thor for strength, to Frigg for mercy, to Odin for wisdom. Outside, the wind wails, and the rafters creak like the ribs of a ship. Soon your eyes will close, and your hammer will stir again. Somewhere, beyond the veil of sleep, something waits, neither friend nor foe, but witness. The night belongs to it. The question is only whether you will wake. For the Norse, dreams were not only the hauntings of the dead or the wanderings of one's own soul, they were also the chosen language of the gods. When the Aesir wished to speak to mortals, they did not always send storms or lightning. Sometimes they sent a whisper, a symbol, a shadow that slipped into a dream. To the Vikings, such moments were sacred and terrible, for no mortal could safely bear the full gaze of the divine while awake. In dreams, however, the veil was thinner, and the human mind could glimpse truth without being burned. You have seen it before, the strange light that comes before dawn, the heavy silence that seems to hold the world still. That is when such dreams arrive. You lie between waking and sleep, and suddenly you are not alone. You feel the weight of presence, vast and familiar. Perhaps it is Odin, the All-Father, wandering again among men as he so often did, seeking knowledge. Or perhaps it is Freya, goddess of love and magic, come to bless or to test you. The Norse knew that not all gods came kindly. Odin's dreams were feared most of all. He was the god of wisdom, yes, but also of madness. His followers, the warriors and poets, sought his favor through visions that could break the mind. He was said to send dreams of battle, of blood and ravens, to mark those chosen for Valhalla. A man who dreamed of Odin's one eye watching him might wake certain that his death was near and yet feel no fear, only awe. To be chosen was both gift and doom. The skalds, keepers of the old songs, often spoke of how inspiration came in dreams. They called it due, the divine madness. Odin's name itself means fury or poetic frenzy. Those who received his dream were changed forever. They might wake and write verses that burned with strange beauty, or they might wake screaming, unable to bear the weight of what they had seen. Some went blind, others deaf. It was said that too much truth could wound as surely as a sword. Frey's dreams were of a different kind. She ruled over Sire, the art of soul travel and vision, and her dreams brought messages wrapped in desire, compassion, and sorrow. Women prayed to her before sleep, asking for guidance in matters of love or childbirth. Her symbols were cats, falcons, and golden tears. If you dreamed of a falcon descending from the sky, it might mean that a lover would return. If you dreamed of a necklace gleaming in darkness, it was her sign, a promise of beauty gained through sacrifice. But not all divine dreams were gentle. The trickster Loki also slipped into the minds of men, twisting visions into chaos. A dream of laughter at the wrong moment, of shifting shapes and burning fields, might be his doing. To the Norse, such dreams were warnings. The world is fragile, fate uncertain, and even the gods can betray. There were dreams, too, that came from Thor the Thunder, protector of mankind. His dreams were blunt, loud, filled with storms and roars. A farmer might dream of his hammer striking the earth, and wake to find his fields fertile, and his herds strong. Or he might dream of the same hammer breaking, and know that misfortune would soon fall upon his home. The gods spoke in symbols that mirrored their nature. To read them required not cleverness, but humility. Sometimes, dreams foretold great events, the death of kings, the fall of empires, the coming of Ragnarok itself. The sagas record many such visions. In Ynglinga Saga, King Halfdan dreamed of a tree that grew from his bed and spread its branches across the world. The trunk stood firm, but the branches snapped one by one. The dream meant that his line would rule for many generations, but in time would wither. He woke understanding both his glory and his doom. The Volva, the seeress who wandered between men and gods, was the one most skilled at reading such dreams. Her own sleep was filled with visions so powerful that she often awoke weeping. She said the gods did not merely show, they demanded. Each dream was a command wrapped in mystery. Refuse it, and one invited disaster. Obey it, and one might still be destroyed, but at least with purpose. In the Velaspa, the great prophecy of the Edda, the seeress recounts her own vision. She sees the creation of the world, the wars of gods and giants, the final fire, and the rebirth of all things. It is not merely a dream, it is revelation. The Vikings believed that such visions were shared among all who were attuned to fate. When the world trembled, even the simplest farmer might dream of strange lights, or the sea boiling, or wolves howling on the horizon. These were the gods' way of warning their children. To receive a divine dream was both blessing and burden. The dreamer became a vessel of power, and power in the Norse world always demanded payment. Some were driven to isolation, unable to live among those who did not see as they did. Others became leaders, prophets, or martyrs. A few became monsters. The thin line between prophet and madman was one the Vikings knew well. There is an old tale of a man named Kettle who dreamed of standing on a mountain, the sky torn open, and a voice saying, "Hold fast, for the sea will claim the land." He woke terrified and warned his village. They laughed until the sea rose days later in a great storm and swallowed half the coast. Afterward, Kettle was honored as a dreamer, but he never spoke again. Some said the voice still echoed in his mind. Because of such stories, the Vikings approached divine dreams with both reverence and caution. Before sleep, they would pour mead onto the earth and speak to the gods softly, asking, "Let my dreams be clear, and my heart strong enough to bear them." They knew that the gods' wisdom was not given freely, it was a bargain, and every bargain carried cost. Even the simplest signs could carry divine weight. A glowing light in the corner of one's vision during a dream, a whisper that spoke one's true name, a vision of a path through the woods lined with bones. All these could mean that the gods were near. The dreamer would wake shaken, knowing that something immense had brushed against their soul. To ignore such a dream was unthinkable. To forget it was impossible. A Viking might change his course, break an oath, or even leave his home because of what he had seen in sleep. When asked why, he would simply say, "The gods showed me." And that was answer enough. So much of their courage, their cruelty, and their faith came from those secret nights. The dreams that carried them into battle were not fantasies, they were callings. The dreams that filled them with dread were not nightmares, they were warnings. They lived between two worlds, always listening for the whisper that came when the world was still. And if you listen now, as the fire crackles low and the wind prowls beyond the door, you might hear it too, the echo of those old voices, the language of symbols and storms. Perhaps the gods still speak, though few today can understand their tongue. Perhaps the dream has not ended, only changed its shape. The Norse would say, "Sleep lightly, traveler. Keep your spirit anchored and your heart steady, for the next dream that comes to you may not be yours at all. It may be a god remembering your name." When the Vikings spoke of dreams, they spoke not only of messages from the gods or whispers from the dead, but of foretellings, visions that reached forward in time like frost creeping across a window pane. Prophetic dreams were rare, but when they came, they changed everything. To dream of the future was to bear a truth too heavy for most hearts. For the Norse, time was not a straight road but a woven thread, and sometimes, in sleep, one could see where that thread was leading. You wake in the middle of the night, your breath ragged, your body slick with cold sweat. You have seen something, an image too sharp to dismiss, too strange to explain. It clings to you even as you sit up, even as the fire flickers. You saw the sea boiling with blood, or a child crowned in light, or a sword breaking in two. You know, in the deep marrow of your bones, that this was not a dream of the past or present, it was a warning. The Vikings had no word for coincidence. Every sign, every omen, every dream had meaning. Fate word in the old tongue was the great law of the cosmos, and no one could escape it. The Norns, the three women who dwelled at the roots of Yggdrasil, wove the destiny of all things. They spun the threads of life from white waters, measured each one, and cut it when its time was done. When a Viking dreamed of the future, it was said that he had glimpsed the loom of the Norns. To see one's own death in a dream was the most dreadful, and yet the most honored of visions. Warriors prayed for it. A man who dreamed of his death could meet it without fear, for it was fated and thus unchangeable. It was not tragedy, it was truth. The sagas are full of such moments. In the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, the hero dreams of his sons wearing the crowns of many lands, while serpents coil around his body. The dream comes true. Ragnar is thrown into a pit of snakes by his enemies, and his sons rise to avenge him. His death was written before he woke. In the saga of the Volsungs, King Sigurd's dreams foretell betrayal, death, and the rise of vengeance. His lover, Brynhild, interprets these dreams with perfect clarity, yet even knowing the outcome cannot change it. The Norse believed that knowledge of fate was not a tool, it was a test. The wise did not seek to alter what was shown, but to face it with dignity. Prophetic dreams were treated as sacred burdens. A dreamer who foresaw disaster bore the responsibility to warn others, no matter the cost. Yet to speak of such things was perilous, for the dream itself was a spell, naming it could bring it closer to being. The Vikings walked a narrow line between silence and duty. A man who spoke too soon might bring doom. A man who kept silent might be cursed by guilt. The Vaelva, the seeress, understood this weight better than anyone. Her entire craft was built upon visions of what was to come. When kings sought her counsel, she did not tell them how to change their fate, only how to prepare for it. She saw time as a circle of flame, each event burning into the next. Her dreams were windows, and she walked between them like a woman crossing bridges made of smoke. In the Veluspa, she tells Odin of Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. She dreams of the sun swallowed by wolves, of the stars falling, of the great serpent rising from the sea. Her dream is the ultimate prophecy, a story so vast that even Odin listens in silence. The world, she says, will end in fire and be born again from ash. Her words were not metaphor. To the Norse, they were destiny carved into the bones of the universe. Ordinary people, too, sometimes dreamed of world-changing things. There is a tale from Iceland of a shepherd who dreamed of a tree that grew from the sea and reached into the clouds. The next spring, a volcano erupted, covering the land in ash. The people said his dream was the mountain warning them. To the Norse, dreams and the natural world were intertwined. The land itself dreamed. Mountains could send visions. Rivers could whisper prophecies, and trees could murmur secrets to those who slept beneath them. A man who slept on sacred ground might wake with knowledge that no one else possessed, but he would never again sleep easily. The closer one came to truth, the further one drifted from peace. There was a strange mercy in these visions, though the Vikings rarely called it that. A dream might reveal that a battle would be lost, a ship wrecked, or a child die young. Yet in knowing this, one could prepare one's heart. The Norse saw no shame in fear. What mattered was how one met it. To face death knowingly was the highest form of courage. The idea of prophecy shaped even their politics. Before great expeditions, chieftains would ask their people what dreams they had seen. A single dream of disaster could delay a voyage. A dream of victory could rally entire clans. In this way, the private world of sleep became a force that guided the living world. Some dreams, though, offered riddles that no one could solve until it was too late. A woman might dream of weaving a red cloth and not understand that the threads were her husband's fate. A man might dream of a wolf and later meet betrayal from his own kin. These were the cruelest dreams, the ones that spoke truth in symbols too subtle to grasp until the moment had already passed. There were also those who dreamed falsely. A dream could be sent not by the gods but by darker forces, spirits that delighted in deception. These false dreams were feared more than any nightmare, for they could lead a man to ruin under the guise of divine guidance. The Vaelva warned that not every vision was sacred. A true dream, she said, left a mark upon the soul, a feeling of inevitability that no argument could shake. False dreams faded with the morning. Still, even the gods themselves were not free from dreaming. In the Edda, Odin dreams of his own doom, of the wolf Fenrir breaking free, of his sons dying in battle. He sees it clearly and cannot change it. He still rides to Ragnarök, knowing that knowledge does not grant escape. The dream does not weaken him, it completes him. To the Norse, this was the highest wisdom, to accept what is written and to act with courage anyway. To dream was to see the shape of the web, even if one could not alter its weave. The Vikings did not seek comfort in prophecy, they sought meaning. The future was not something to be avoided, it was something to be met with open eyes. When you wake from such a dream, the world feels different. The air seems thinner, the sound of the sea sharper, as if reality itself has shifted slightly to make room for what you now know. You do not speak of it, not yet. You carry it like a stone in your chest, heavy but steady. It is not fear that holds you now, it is knowledge. Outside, the wind moves through the trees, and the stars glint like runes carved into the sky. Somewhere beneath them, the Norns continue their weaving. You think of the thread that is yours, glowing faintly among countless others. Perhaps in some future night, you will dream again and see where it ends. But for now you rise quietly, feed the fire, and whisper a single prayer to the gods of sleep, not for peace, but for strength to bear what dreams may come. There were whispers, even among the bravest of the Norse, that some people did not merely see dreams, they entered them. They were called Draumgänger, dreamwalkers, souls who could leave their bodies behind and move through the shadowed realm of sleep, as though it were another world. The sagas tell of them with both awe and dread, for what they saw could not always be forgotten, and what they touched did not always remain untouched. You lie awake under the long dark of the northern night. The fire is low, the coals glow like eyes half hidden under ash. Around you, the others sleep, their breath slow, their minds deep in whatever visions claim them. You, however, hover on the edge between waking and dreaming, aware of the soft pulse of blood in your temples, the strange pull behind your eyes. It feels as though something is calling not from outside, but from within. The Vikings believed that the human soul was not a single, solid thing. It was made of parts: the hammer, the form that could change or travel; the hugger, the thought and will that gave it power; and the fjords, the spirit double that washed and guided. When one slept, these parts could separate. A strong will could send the hammer far from the body, over mountains, through storm and sea, into the dreams of others. To walk the dream was not a gift to be sought lightly. The veil warned that those who left their bodies in sleep risked never finding their way back. The world of dreams was like a forest filled with invisible snares. The spirit could be caught, twisted, changed. There were tales of men who woke with strange marks upon their skin, or women who woke with the taste of salt or iron on their tongues, as if they had swallowed the sea or blood while wandering. Some dreamwalkers were revered. A Sakona woman skilled in sorcery might use her dreams to see what no mortal eyes could. She would close her eyes beside a sacred fire, murmur charms, and send her hammer out to gather knowledge. When she returned, her voice would tremble as she spoke of what she had seen. Ships lost in fog, kings betrayed, beasts stirring in the dark. Her body would lie still as driftwood, her breath shallow, while her spirit ranged across worlds. But others who possessed this power were feared. There were men who used dream walking as a weapon. They would send their hammer into the dreams of their enemies, bringing nightmares that crushed the heart or madness that drove the mind astray. It was said that such a spirit could smother a sleeper or steal the strength from his limbs. Those cursed in this way woke as though from drowning, gasping and hollow-eyed. No spear could defend against a foe that struck through sleep. In the Ynglinga saga, it is told that Odin himself practiced this art. He could send his hammer afar while his body lay as if dead, and through that spirit he could spy, speak, or fight. It was his gift and his danger, for sometimes his soul wandered too far and took long to return. This was the double-edged truth of dream-walking. The further one went, the harder the way back became. The hammer was said to take on forms the shape of a raven, a wolf, or even mist. Some claimed to have seen dream-walkers in this form, drifting at the edges of campfires or over the decks of sleeping ships. A shiver would pass through the sleepers then, as if an unseen wind had touched them. They would wake uneasy, sensing that something had crossed the threshold of their rest. Among the Icelanders, stories were told of night-sitters, women who visited sleepers as shadow or smoke. They were both feared and pitied. Some were witches seeking revenge, others simply souls unable to rest. A man who felt his breath leave him in sleep, who woke with bruises but no cause, might swear that a night-sitter had been upon him. The old remedy was to carve runes of protection upon the bedpost and hang sprigs of rowan or juniper to keep the spirit out. Yet, as with all things in the Norse world, there was no clear boundary between blessing and curse. To dreamwalk was to stand close to the gods, but also close to death. Those who carried the gift too long grew pale and withdrawn, their eyes shadowed by things they had seen. The more they wandered, the less of them returned. In the end, some stopped waking altogether, their bodies cold though their hearts still faintly beat. You remember the stories told by the fire of Torbjorn the shepherd who dreamed himself across the mountains to find his lost sheep, only to wake with frostbite on his feet. Of Sigrid the seeress who saw her lover's ship sink, and screamed so loud in her dream that the men on board heard it before the storm struck. These were not tales meant to entertain, they were warnings. The Vikings believed that dreams could be shared. Lovers might meet in their sleep and speak without words. Enemies could fight unseen battles in the world of spirits. Sometimes two people would wake with the same vision, proof that their souls had touched beyond the body. Such events were recorded in sagas with awe. The web of fate was not bound by the waking world alone. The curse of the dreamwalker was loneliness. No one fully trusted those who could slip free of flesh and bone. Even their own kin looked at them askance, wondering whether they spoke as humans or as spirits half gone. They lived between worlds, and between worlds there is no rest. Still, on the darkest nights, when storms howled over the fjords and the sea thundered against the cliffs, even the skeptics would feel the pull of that hidden power. Dreams came stronger then. The veil between worlds thinned, and the old fears crept in. Mothers whispered charms over their children. Warriors laid their swords by the bed, and all prayed not to be seen by wandering souls. Because to be seen in a dream was to be known utterly, and to be known was to be vulnerable. At times, when the night was long and the wind keened like something lost, the dreamwalker's curse became everyone's burden. Sleep was no refuge, it was a battlefield. The Vikings feared their own dreams because they understood too well that what walked there was real. When morning comes, you wake with the memory of movement in your chest as if your heart had traveled far and only just returned. The light seems thinner, the sound of the gulls distant. You touch your wrist and feel something fade, a mark you cannot explain. You tell yourself it is nothing, but deep down, you know that part of you did not sleep at all. It went out into the world where the living and the dead cross paths. And perhaps, somewhere in the midst of another's dream, it still wanders. The Norse had a word for nightmares, martrum, a crushing dream. To suffer one was not simply to wake frightened, but to wake as if something had been sitting upon your chest, stealing your breath, weighing your body down with invisible hands. The people of the North believed these were not tricks of the mind, but real attacks by spirits that preyed on the sleeper. Dreams were not harmless in their world, they had claws and hunger. When you sleep, the first thing you feel is the cold pressing in from the walls. The wind claws at the roof like a living thing. The embers fade, then the air grows still, heavy. You cannot move your limbs. Your eyes are open, but the room is drawn too dark, too large. You hear a sound like slow breathing that is not your own. And then you feel it. The weight, something unseen crouches on your chest. The Vikings called that thing the Mara, the nightmare being. She was said to be the spirit of a restless woman, cursed or malicious, who traveled at night and tormented sleepers. The Mara would creep through cracks or keyholes, sit upon the victim, and drink their life's breath. In morning light, they would wake pale, weak, and trembling, as if the night itself had drained them. The word Mara would later give birth to Mare in English, and Mar in German, the root of the word nightmare. But for the Norse, she was more than a metaphor. She was a shape-shifter, ghost, sometimes even a witch who sent her spirit abroad in this form. It was said that if you turned the pillow upside down before sleeping, you could trap the Mara underneath it. Others placed iron beneath the bed, for no spirit could cross metal forged in fire. Rowan branches were another charm, hung above doorways or tucked into the rafters. The smell of the wood itself was thought to drive away evil. Still, not every nightmare came from outside. Sometimes, the Vikings whispered, the morrow was born within the dreamer themselves. A guilty soul might project its fear into shape, and that shape would come back to punish its maker. Those who carried secrets or unconfessed deeds often suffered the worst dreams. The dead, it was said, could sense the weight of hidden sin and send nightmares as reminders. The sagas are filled with descriptions of such torment. In the saga of Gisli Surson, a man dreams that he lies trapped beneath the earth, crushed by stone. When he wakes, he knows that his fate is sealed, that he will soon die for his crimes. In another tale, a woman dreams that a wolf stands at her door, knowing at the threshold, within days, her brother is slain. Dreams in these stories are not warnings, they are manifestations. They are the world's way of announcing what has already begun to happen. Sometimes, a nightmare was not a single spirit but a host of them. The Draugr, the undead, were said to invade the dreams of the living before they rose from their graves. A man who dreamed of a familiar face calling his name might wake to find that the person was dead, or worse, walking toward his door. To the Norse, the veil between waking and sleeping was a thin skin. When you slept, your soul traveled through that veil, and if it stayed too long or went too deep, you might bring something back with you. The nightmare was the price of wandering too far into that other side. Children were especially vulnerable. Mothers would murmur old charms as they tucked them in. Sleep not alone, child of men. Keep iron near and fire within. Let no mare ride your breast tonight. Let no shadow steal your sight. The belief in the morrow was so strong that it bled into daily life. People who woke screaming were marked as touched by spirits. A man too often haunted might be avoided, for fear that the morrow followed in. A woman who walked at night could be accused of sending her spirit out to torment others. Fear of the unseen wove itself into community law and ritual, shaping behavior as much as any chieftain's word. But the Norse were also practical people. They built their faith in balance between myth and experience. They saw patterns in the world. If a nightmare always came before sickness, then the dream was not fantasy, it was a sign. A mind tormented in sleep meant a soul unprotected. To dream of being buried, bitten, or crushed was to feel death reaching through the dark. Scholars in later centuries would say that the Vikings were describing what we now call sleep paralysis, the strange half-state between waking and dreaming when the body cannot move, and hallucinations feel real. But to the Vikings, this was not an explanation, it was confirmation. They had always known that sleep was dangerous. There were stories, too, of those who learned to fight back. Some men claimed they could seize the Mara by grabbing her hand mid-dream, holding fast until dawn. When the light came, the spirit would be forced into human shape, trapped and helpless. She might appear as a pale woman, a neighbor, even a loved one. The captured Mara would beg for release, promising never to return. Yet the brave who tried this often died young. No mortal could hold a spirit without losing something of himself. The veil that taught that nightmares were not only attacks, but messages. What crushes you, she said, is what you have buried. A man haunted by the dead might have broken an oath. A woman visited by beasts might have suppressed anger or sorrow. In the Viking world, dreams were a mirror polished by fear, showing the soul not as it wished to be seen, but as it truly was. On winter nights, when the wind screamed through the gaps in the roof and the snow piled high outside, whole households would huddle close around the hearth, whispering their dreams to each other. By naming the horrors aloud, they believed they could rob them of their power. Better to share the nightmare than to let it fester alone in the dark. You think of that as you lie again, listening to the long sigh of the fire. Sleep will come, as it always does. But now you know that sleep is a journey, and dreams are landscapes no map can chart. Somewhere beyond the edge of sight, the Mara waits, her cold breath close against your skin. You close your eyes and whisper a line from an old prayer, barely remembering who taught it to you. Guard me from the shadow rider. Hold me fast until day's fire. The darkness folds over you. The air hums. And deep in the place where the waking mind ends and the other world begins, the nightmare stirs again. There were nights in the north when even the bravest Viking would not lie easily under his furs. The air would turn still and sharp, and the dogs outside would begin to growl at nothing. That was how one knew the dead were walking through dreams again. The Norse did not believe death was a clean division. The grave was not a wall, it was a door that sometimes swung open. The soul, Huger, lingered close to the world of the living, especially when bound by violence, unfinished vows, or love that had turned sour. And in the long, cold dark, when men and women slept most deeply, that was when the dead reached through. You sleep by the hearth, the last of the embers sighing to ash. Somewhere beyond the walls, snow falls so thickly that even the sea's roar is muffled. You dream of footsteps on frozen ground, slow and deliberate. When you wake, you hear them still. The Vikings called the restless dead Draugr. These were not spirits in the thin, transparent sense. Draugr were corporeal, swollen with death, heavy with malice. They lay in their graves by day guarding their treasures, but by night they rose to visit the living. Sometimes they came in flesh, sometimes only in dream. The sagas are full of their hauntings. In Grettir's saga, the hero Grettir faces glamour, a shepherd slain in the snow who rises again to terrorize the farmstead. Before Grettir meets him, the locals speak of their dreams. Glamour's pale face bending over them in sleep, his eyes like frost, his breath the stench of grave soil. When Grettir finally kills the monster, he is cursed never to know peace. Even victory cannot erase the mark of death once it touches the soul. The Vikings feared such dreams because they knew they were not illusions. If the dead appeared, it meant something was demanded. The living owed the dead remembrance offerings, and sometimes justice. A forgotten ancestor might whisper in a dream for his descendants to pour ale upon his grave or raise a mound over his bones. A murdered man might appear until his killer was revealed. To ignore these messages was to invite disaster. The rituals to appease the dead were simple but sacred. Bread, mead, or milk left at the threshold on winter nights. A token cast into the fire. Words spoken softly into the dark. But sometimes even that was not enough. Some Draugr were too angry to be soothed, too bound to vengeance. They entered dreams not to speak but to drag. The sleeper would wake gasping, feeling as though pulled downward into cold earth. In Icelandic lore, people said that the Draugr could call one's name through a dream. To answer was fatal. If you replied, even in sleep, your soul would begin to slip from your body. The next morning, you would wake weak, gray as though half your life had been taken. The third night, you would not wake at all. That was why the Vikings taught children never to answer voices in their dreams. No matter how familiar they sounded, no matter how tender. The dead wore many faces. There was a woman named Fjords, whose story is told in the Eyrbyggja saga. Her husband drowned at sea, but every night afterward he came to her in dreams, calling her to follow him. For weeks she resisted. Then, one bitter night, she dreamed of him standing in the doorway, hand outstretched, his hair wet, his eyes kind. She took his hand. The next morning, her family found her body cold and smiling, her palm crusted with salt. Even Odin, greatest of the gods, did not ignore the dreams of the dead. In the Baldur's Dramar, he rides to hell to ask a dead Vaelva for prophecy, and she greets him with bitter laughter. You ride to ask of the dead, O Father, she says, but you will not like their answers. The dead see further than the living, but their knowledge carries pain. There was also a gentler belief, hidden under all the terror. that the dead dreamed with the living, not against them, that ancestors watched from beyond, guiding their kin through visions. A mother might dream of her lost child and wake feeling not sorrow but calm. A sailor might dream of his father pointing toward the safest fjord. In this, the boundary between haunting and blessing blurred. The dead were never entirely gone, they simply changed their way of speaking. Still, most feared the nights when the dreaming world grew crowded. Winter solstice was the worst. The Vikings called it the deep midwinter feast. It was said that during those nights, the wild hunt rode across the sky Odin leading a host of dead warriors and spirits. Their passing filled the air with howling wind. To dream on such a night was dangerous. Those who slept too deeply might be swept up into the hunt, their souls carried far from their bodies. Some never returned. People warded their houses with runes and iron nails. They kept fires burning through the longest nights, for the light was the only thing that could keep the dead from pressing too close. They told stories to stay awake, songs to drown the howling outside, and yet exhaustion always won. You drift into sleep. You see your grandfather standing at the edge of the shore, looking out at a ship that burns upon the waves. His face is neither sad nor glad, only waiting. When he turns to you, his eyes are filled with light. You know, somehow, that this dream is not a threat. He is reminding you all journeys end here, in flame and sea. When you wake, tears are already on your face, though you do not remember weeping. The Vikings did not separate fear from reverence. The dead were terrifying because they were close. Death itself was not a void, it was a continuation, a realm adjacent to the living. When you dreamed of the dead, you were not imagining them, you were visiting them. Sometimes, when dawn came, the frost on the window would melt in the shape of a handprint, or the firewood would crack in a way that sounded like a whisper. The old people would nod knowingly and murmur, "They are remembering us too." You rise, feed the fire, and pour a few drops of meat onto the ground. The smoke curls upward, vanishing. The room grows warmer, and you whisper the old words that mean both goodbye and welcome. Sleep well, you who were. Dream gently, you who remain. Outside, the snow keeps falling, quiet and endless. The dead are dreaming again. And so are you. The Vikings believed that the gods were not distant. They did not dwell in unreachable heavens, but walked invisibly beside men, listening, guiding, and at times, testing. Yet the gods did not always speak through thunder or vision. Often, they came quietly through dreams. You sleep beneath the rafters of a longhouse after a long day of toil. The fire has burned down to coals. Smoke curls upward into the roof hole, and the wind outside hums like a lullaby. The world is hushed. Then, in the space between one breath and the next, you hear a voice. It does not sound exactly, but something deeper weight in the chest, a word without words. You know it instantly. Something vast is speaking. The Norse called such visions Gudstromer, God dreams. They were rare and dangerous gifts, for the gods' messages were never simple blessings. To dream of a god was to stand too close to fire. Those who woke from such dreams were changed, sometimes for good, sometimes for ruin. Among the gods, Odin was the greatest master of dreams. He was not only the All-Father, but the Fimbultor, the mighty magician. His power was knowledge, and knowledge came at a cost. Odin sent dreams as weapons, riddles, or revelations. In the Ynglinga saga, it is said that he could whisper into the minds of sleeping warriors, stirring courage or madness as he pleased. His chosen heroes dreamed of battle before dawn, saw the enemy's faces, and woke already tasting victory or death. Odin's own dreams were heavier still. In the Baldur's Dromar, he dreams of the death of his beloved son Baldur. He rides into hell to question a dead prophetess about the meaning of this dream. The veil that tells him that Baldur's death is fated and that nothing can change it. Odin knows she speaks truth, yet he fights against it anyway, sending all creation to swear an oath not to harm his son. But the dream wins. The arrow flies. The god of light dies. The lesson was carved deep into the Norse mind. Even the gods dream, and even they cannot escape what dreams reveal. But Odin was not the only one who sent visions. Freya, goddess of love and sorcery, was mistress of Sire, the art that wove fate and dream together. Her followers, the Seeker, said that Freya's presence in a dream was felt as warmth and gold light, like sunrise after storm. To dream of her was to be reminded of longing the power that binds all things, even gods. Warriors dreamed of her before battle, maidens before childbirth, seers before prophecy. She was both comfort and warning. To love deeply was also to lose deeply. Thor rarely appeared in dreams, but when he did, it was unmistakable. His presence was thunder itself, the shaking of the soul. People who dreamed of Thor often woke shouting, their hearts racing as if struck by lightning. Farmers prayed for such dreams during harsh winters, for they believed Thor's voice could drive away evil spirits that plagued the land. Loki's dreams were another matter. The trickster god did not visit sleepers as a teacher but as a tempter. He whispered in riddles, filling the mind with chaos. A person who dreamed of Loki would wake restless, full of ideas too wild to speak aloud. Some called these dreams curses, others called them sparks of genius. Loki blurred the line between inspiration and madness, between warning and invitation. Dreams were the bridge between the divine and the mortal. Through them, fate spoke. The Vikings believed that those who ignored such dreams did so at their peril. A man who saw Odin in his sleep and failed to offer thanks might find his fortunes turned. A woman who dreamed of Freya and refused to honor her might find love slipping away. The gods demanded acknowledgement, even when they came in silence. There were signs to tell if a dream came from the gods or from lesser spirits. True god dreams were said to leave the dreamer with a sense of weight, as though they carried part of another world upon waking. The air seemed thicker, the colors sharper. The words or symbols of the dream would burn in memory, impossible to forget. By contrast, false dreams faded like mist. Seeresses trained their apprentices to interpret divine dreams. They listened for patterns. The flight of ravens meant Odin's presence. A field of golden grain was Freya's blessing. A hammer striking stone was Thor's protection. Sometimes, these signs came to entire clans at once, an entire village dreaming of the same fire, the same storm. Those were considered omens of great events, wars, plagues, or kings' deaths. In one saga, a farmer named Hakon dreamed of a great tree whose roots wrapped around his house. A man with one eye and a gray cloak stood beside it, carving runes into the bark. When Hakon woke, his cattle were dead, and his wife ill. He went to the local seer, who told him, "Odin has taken what he is owed. You are marked." Hakon sacrificed a bull at the old shrine, and his wife recovered. The gods, it seemed, had been merciful. Yet, for all their fear of divine dreams, the Vikings also sought them. Kings slept on sacred ground before great battles, hoping to receive visions. Warriors drank mixtures of herbs and mead to summon dreams of the gods. They would lie down before statues of Odin or Freya, waiting for a sign. Some claimed to see nothing. Others woke screaming, half-mad, but certain that they had been touched by something beyond. Dreams were both test and blessing. A god might appear to grant strength or to see what a mortal would do when faced with truth. Many who dreamed of Odin were offered a choice, knowledge or peace. Those who chose knowledge were forever restless, haunted by what they had learned. To the Norse, this was the heart of existence. The gods themselves lived in tension between knowing and suffering. Odin sacrificed his eye for wisdom, hung himself on Yggdrasil for runes, dreamed of his son's death, and still pressed forward. Dream and fate were the same weave. To see was to hurt, to ignore was to perish. Sometimes, when the longhouse grew quiet, and the flames danced low, people would whisper prayers before sleep, not for safety, but for vision. Let the gods speak, if they must. Let me bear what they show. May my dreams be clear, and my heart steadfast. And if, in the deep hours, they heard whispers like wind in the rafters, they would not stir. The gods were near. When you wake from such a dream, dawn is a thin gold line across the horizon. The air smells of wood smoke and sea salt. You cannot recall the words spoken, only the feeling of vast calm, tinged with dread. You know that something has shifted inside you. A decision is waiting, though you do not yet know what it is. Outside, the ravens are calling. The day begins. And somewhere beyond the waking world, the gods return to their own sleep, dreaming of you. Sleep was not silence for the Norse. In that dim border between waking and death, the mind became a field of symbols, shifting, luminous, alive. The Vikings believed dreams had their own grammar, a hidden tongue spoken by God's spirits and fate itself. To understand a dream was to read the language of the runes. Runes were not just letters, they were living signs, each one carved with intention, humming with power. When a carver pressed his knife into bone or wood, he wasn't merely writing, he was invoking. The same belief held true for dreams. Each image, each sound, was a rune inscribed upon the mind by unseen hands. When you closed your eyes after a long day at sea, you might see a single rune burning on a black field. Fehu, perhaps, the sign of cattle and wealth. You would wake believing it a promise of prosperity. Yet the next week your herd would sicken, and you'd understand too late that the rune's message had been inverted. In dreams, the runes could deceive. They were mirrors, reflecting both gift and warning. The seers taught that every dream symbol was a rune in disguise. A tree with roots tangled round bones was Iowa's, the rune of death and endurance. A serpent biting its tail was Jera, the cycle of seasons and fate returning upon itself. Fire sweeping through a hall was Kenez, the torch of knowledge that burns as it reveals. Dreams were stories told in this language of power, stories no tongue could translate completely. In the sagas, there are tales of those who dreamed in runes. The poet Egil Skallagrimsson was said to have seen the shape of his own death written across the sky in a stormy vision. Jagged lines of flame forming a rune he could not name. He spent his final days carving that same shape into his cup, into his sword, into his heart. When he died, the cup cracked, the sword rusted, and people said the rune had finished its work. Runes were tools for decoding what the dream hid, but they were also doorways. The most daring magicians, rune singers, they were called, used carved staves as guides into dream states. Before sleep, they would trace runes upon their skin in soot or blood, whispering charms to align their spirit with the forces they invoked. Ansus for wisdom, Perthro for fate, Lagus for the waters of the unconscious. To dream under such marks was to invite the runes themselves to speak. Some awoke enlightened, others never woke at all. A story told in the north of Iceland tells of a man named Kettle, who sought to learn the runes of prophecy. He fasted for 9 nights, as Odin had done, and on the 10th he carved the runes of revelation into his palms before sleeping. In his dream, he found himself standing before a vast tree whose branches were stars. Each leaf bore a rune of light. He reached for one, but as he touched it, the tree caught fire, and he fell through the burning sky. When he woke, the runes had vanished from his skin, but his hair had turned white, and he never spoke again. Those who knew him said that the runes had answered, and the answer had been too great for mortal flesh. Dreams of runes were considered both blessing and ordeal. They were thought to come from Odin himself, the god who had hung 9 nights on Yggdrasil, pierced by his own spear, dreaming of the runes that lay beneath the bark of the world. He had died, and yet lived, and in that death dream, he had learned the shapes of truth. Thus, to dream of runes was to echo the All-Father's sacrifice, to glimpse, if only briefly, the structure of creation. But mortals were not Odin. To them, knowledge without balance was perilous. Seers warned that interpreting dreams too eagerly could anger the hidden powers. A man who boasted of his prophetic vision might find the gods mocking him with false dreams. A woman who saw a rune of love might believe herself blessed, only to lose all she cherished. The runes, The wise said, "Have teeth." There were rituals for safe reading. Upon waking, a dreamer would sit facing east, where the sun rose, and recall the dream aloud. A seeress or wise man would listen, laying out rune staves on a white cloth, letting them fall where they may. The pattern of fallen runes was then compared to the dream's imagery. A snake entwining Thorses and alges foretold a powerful enemy guarded by divine will. A spiral around Issa warned of frozen fates, desires trapped, unable to move. The dream and the runes mirrored one another, weaving interpretation from chance and faith. Yet there were times when even the most learned could not read what they saw. Some dreams bore runes that had no name, angular, crooked signs that shimmered and faded before the dreamer could fix them in memory. These were the lost runes, said to belong to the giants or to ages before man. To dream of them was to stand at the edge of meaning itself, where even gods were blind. The poets of the skaldic court sang of runic dreams as divine correspondence, the gods writing letters into the souls of those who would listen. A warrior dreaming of a broken sword might awaken knowing which battle to avoid. A mother dreaming of a raven over her cradle might sense death's wing approaching. In every dream the runes spoke, though not all who dreamed could hear them. There is a quiet beauty in imagining those nights, the fire dying low, snow pressing against the walls, the dreamer turning beneath a wool blanket as unseen hands write on the canvas of their mind. When morning comes, they wake with half a word still echoing, a soundless rune pulsing in their chest. They go about their day changed, though they cannot say why. Something has been written in them, and it will not fade. To the Vikings, this was what it meant to be alive, to live as a rune, a sign carved into the wood of the world, trembling with meaning. Sleep was the knife, dream the carving. Every night fate wrote upon them anew. Even now, across the centuries, something of that belief lingers. People still wake from dreams clutching fragments of symbols, spirals, beasts, strange letters, and wonder what they mean. They reach for the same language, though its grammar is lost. The old fear remains, that our dreams know more than we do, and that somewhere, in the deep of sleep, the runes still speak. There were dreams that shook the north, dreams not of small things, not of ships, or kin, or cattle, but of the world itself cracking open. The Vikings call such visions varadramar, the warning dreams. When they came to many at once, to jarls, thralls, seers, and children. They came in winters that felt too long and skies that burned red over the fjords. People whispered that the wolf age was stirring. In these dreams, the sun was eaten, the moon bled, the seas boiled. The wolf Fenrir broke his chains, and his howl echoed across all 9 worlds. Those who dreamed of it woke shaking, tasting ash in their mouths, their hearts hammering like war drums. It was not merely fear, it was recognition. They had seen what was to come. You lie in your bed of straw, the hearth faintly glowing. The storm outside has stilled. In sleep, your breath deepens, and the world begins to slide away. Then, you are standing on a plain of frost. Before you rises a great wolf, its eyes the color of iron. Its breath freezes the air. Behind it, the sky is splitting, light and dark tearing apart like cloth. You feel the ground move under you, the heartbeat of something ancient and immense. And when the wolf speaks, its voice is like stone grinding against stone. It begins. You wake gasping, drenched in sweat. The fire has gone out. The house is silent, and yet you can still hear the echo of those words in your skull. Such dreams were feared, but also revered. They were said to come from the word itself, from the deep web of fate that bound gods and men alike. To dream of the wolf age was to see the unraveling of that web, the moment when even the weavers, the Norns, would fall silent. The Sagas tell that, in the generations before great wars or plagues, such dreams came more often. People would speak of seeing the same signs, wolves chasing the sun, ships made of dead men's nails, giants wading through fire. No one doubted what they meant. Ragnarok, the doom of the gods, was near. To the Norse mind, This was not merely a future event, but a pattern, a rhythm in the bones of creation. The world had begun in fire and ice, and it would end in the same. The dream of the wolf age was the pulse of that cycle, the reminder that even the gods must die and be reborn. Odin himself was said to be haunted by such dreams. In the poems of the Veluspa, the seeress tells him of what he already knows, that he has dreamed his own death many times. He has seen the wolf leap for his throat, has felt the spear fall from his hand, has watched the flames rise around the roots of Yggdrasil. Yet he still rides forth to meet that fate, because to turn away would be to betray the order of all things. The people took strength from that. If even the All-Father must face his doom, then so must they. To dream of the end was not despair, but initiation. It meant the dreamer had glimpsed the great design. The wolf-age dream carried with it strange symptoms. Some who dreamed of it would wake with blood on their lips, though they had bitten nothing. Others found frost forming on their eyelashes. Even by the summer hearth, their voices would tremble when they spoke of it, and they would look often to the sky as though expecting it to crack. Seers interpreted these signs carefully. If the dreamer saw the wolf chained, the vision was a warning but not yet fulfillment, chaos held at bay. But if the chains were broken, if the dreamer heard the roar of the sea or the crack of the world tree, then the omen was personal. It meant a life would soon end, or a household fall. The great destruction reflected itself in small mirrors, one man's ruin echoing the gods. There are stories of whole villages visited by the same dream. In one told in the Vatnsdala saga, 100 people saw the wolf run through the northern lights on the same night. The next season, a sickness came that carried half the valley away. In another, 3 brothers dreamed of standing on a burning ship as it drifted into the sun. Within a year, their longboat was lost in a storm. To those who survived, it was proof that the gods sent warnings, not to stop fate, but to prepare the heart to meet it. The poets called such dreams the mirror of dusk. They believed that in them the dreamer saw not only the future but the truth of existence, that all things, even glory, fade. The wolf devours not only the sun, one skald wrote, but also the memory of warmth. Yet there was hope hidden in the horror. In the same Veluspa that sings of Ragnark, the seeress speaks of what follows, a green earth rising from the sea, the air clear, the gods reborn. She tells of Balder returning from hell, of a new hall built in sunlight. Some dreamers claim to have seen this too. A second vision that followed the first, softer, filled with birdsong and the scent of grass. It was said that those who dreamed of both destruction and renewal were marked as wisdom keepers, people who carried the knowledge that even the end was part of the beginning. Dreams of the wolf age carried a dual power, terror and revelation. They reminded the Vikings that every feast might be the last, every sunrise a gift. Life, to them, was sharpened by its impermanence. To dream of the world's death was to wake more vividly into it, to breathe deeper, fight harder, love more fiercely, knowing that everything burns. There were ways to protect against such dreams, though few were truly believed to work. A charm of iron under the pillow might keep the wolf at bay. A prayer to Freya for gentle sleep might soften the visions. Some burned sage and ashwood tracing runes of protection, alges and iwas, across the doorframe. But even the bravest knew that no rune could bind the fate written in the bones of the cosmos. Still, when a dreamer woke trembling and told of wolves, of blood-red skies, of the gods' final battle, others would listen in silence. The fire would crackle. Someone might mutter a prayer, and though they would not speak it aloud, they all felt the same chill, the sense that the dream belonged to them, too, because deep down every Viking knew the truth that the dream carried, that the wolf age is not a moment in time but a shadow within every soul. The hunger, the rage, the breaking of bonds, all these live inside men as much as in monsters, and perhaps that was why they feared their dreams. Not because they showed the end of the world, but because they showed the end within themselves. The sea ruled the Viking soul as much as any god. It was their road, their mirror, their grave. They were born to its rhythm, to the roar of surf, the hiss of tide over pebbles, the scent of salt in their blood. Every journey, every raid, every trade began and ended on its waves. Yet when the sea entered a dream, it was never merely water. It was a voice. It was memory. It was judgment. To dream of the sea was to dream of something older than gods, the vast mother who had existed before the world tree took root. In the creation stories, it was the sea's mist that birthed Inner, the first being. The Norse knew that what gives life can also reclaim it. So, when a man woke with salt drying on his lips, heart pounding from visions of black water, he would go to the nearest shore and listen to the waves as if they might finish the dreamed sentence. Sailors were the most hunted. After long voyages, they spoke of sleeping uneasily, the roll of waves still moving beneath their skins. They would see endless horizons, ghost ships made of light, or women rising from the deep, pale, wordless, watching. Some dreams brought comfort. Calm seas, gulls crying, the sun golden on the water. Those were blessings. But others carried the sound of oars in fog, of drums beneath the surface. Those dreams were warnings. One saga tells of a helmsman who dreamed his ship's keel turned upside down, the stars reflecting in the sea as if the world itself had inverted. He woke certain that his death was near. 3 days later, a sudden gale flipped his boat. His body was never found. The old one said he had already sailed that voyage in his sleep. The Vikings believed that at night, the spirit could travel along the sea roads as easily as the waking body did by day. The Hugr, the soul thought, could leave the flesh floating over dark waters, visiting far shores or speaking with the dead. Such journeys were called Shudramr, sea dreams. Many avoided them, fearing they might not return. But some seers, poets, lonely wives sought them deliberately, drinking herb mead and lying on boards carved with runes of travel. In those dreams, they said, the sea was never empty. The drowned walked its depths, carrying torches of green fire. The hulls of long-lost ships sailed beneath the surface, their crews singing soundless songs. At times, the dreamer might glimpse Ran, the goddess of the deep, whose net caught the drowned and kept them as her guests. To dream of Ran was to be marked. Some said she smiled before she took you. Others said she only came to those she pitied. If a man saw her in sleep, he would pour ale into the waves the next morning, whispering, "Take the drink, not me." But not all sea dreams were nightmares. Some were revelations. The ocean could show what lay beyond the edge of the known world. Traders returning from McCloggard or the White Sea sometimes claimed they had dreamed new coasts before finding them. The sea tells what it remembers. The old captain said, "We only listen in our sleep." Those who dreamed of clear water often woke inspired, restless for voyage. It was said that Odin himself sent such dreams, stirring explorers toward distant lands. A sailor who ignored them risked stagnation. One who followed them might never return, but his name would be sung. The Velaspa hints that even the gods dreamed of the sea. Before the end, the poem says, the serpent Jormungandr will stir in the deep, his coils shaking the world. Perhaps the gods saw that in their sleep, the endless heaving dark, the smell of brine and blood. The sea is not gentle, even to divinity. On land, fishermen's wives learned to read their husbands' dreams like weather signs. A dream of calm water meant safe return. A dream of whales meant struggle. A dream of a red horizon meant blood on the deck. If a woman dreamed of an empty net, she would light a candle at the shore and wait. Many never saw their men again. The sea also spoke to kings. The sagas tell of Harald Fairhair, who dreamed his fleet burned upon a mirror still sea. The flames reflected perfectly in the glassy water. He woke troubled and asked his seers what it meant. They told him, "Your peace will destroy you. Fire comes from stillness." Within months, rebellion rose across his realm. He won the wars, but his dream came true. His ships and sons both consumed. To the Vikings, the sea was not only a place, but a mind vast, changeable, deep beyond measure. When they dreamed of it, they were touching that mind, hearing its slow pulse. Sometimes it whispered truth, sometimes it lied. Either way, the dreamer woke smaller, aware that his life was a single drop on an endless tide. There were rituals for calming sea dreams. A bowl of seawater might be set beside the bed, to let the spirit return safely if it wandered. A piece of driftwood under the pillow would anchor the soul. Before voyages, captains leapt on their ships to test their dreams. If they saw calm, they sailed. If they saw darkness, they delayed. The bravest ignored the signs, believing fate could not be bargained with. Many of them never reached harbor again. And yet, even fear carried reverence. The Vikings did not curse the sea for its cruelty. They loved it as one loves a god, fiercely, hopelessly. In their dreams, it was both cradle and coffin, beginning and end. Sometimes, on nights when the moon shone like a coin over black water, they said you could hear the dead rowing under the waves, their longships creaking, their voices humming low. To dream of that sound was to be reminded. One day you would join them, sailing forever beneath the same sea that once carried you to glory. When you wake from such a dream, your skin smells faintly of salt. The world feels vast, older than your heartbeat. You listen to the wind outside and think you can hear waves, though you are far from shore. Something calls to you, not in words, but in tide and pulse. And for a moment, you understand why your ancestors feared their own dreams. Because some part of you still remembers the sea, the first mother, the last grave, whispering from the depths, waiting for you to sleep again. In the north, dreams did not belong only to peasants or wanderers. Kings dreamed too, and when they did, the whole realm listened. For the Vikings believed that a ruler's dreams were not his own. They were messages meant for the people, warnings written by the gods in the sleep of the mighty. A king's bed was never quiet. Beneath the weight of fur and crown, beneath the silence of stone halls, he carried the restlessness of his bloodline. All those before him who had ruled fought and died. When he closed his eyes, he joined their company. His dreams became a council of the dead. There are tales of kings who woke screaming, their bodies trembling with visions of war and betrayal. Some saw their halls filled with wolves, their banners drenched in crimson light. Others dreamed of crowns melting like wax, of swords that turned against their wielders. In such nights, no prayer could soothe them, for these were not nightmares. They were verdicts. The Heimskringla tells of King Halfdan the Black, who dreamed of a mighty tree growing from his heart. Its branches reached over all Norway, and its leaves shone like gold. When he told his seers, they said, "The tree is your bloodline. Its shade will cover kingdoms." They were right. From him would come Harald Fairhair, the first great king of Norway. But there were other interpretations, whispered in the dark. The tree might also mean that his descendants would bleed the land dry, their roots drinking from graves. Dreams were never single-edged. Blood appeared often in the dreams of rulers. The Ynglinga saga describes it as both prophecy and curse. If a king dreamed of rivers turning red, his warriors would fall in battle within the year. If he dreamed of drinking blood from a horn, he would soon slay a kinsman. To spill blood in sleep was to be marked for violence in waking life. And yet, kings sought these dreams. Before great campaigns, they would sleep in temples beneath carved idols of Odin or Freyr, hoping for visions. To dream of Odin was an omen of victory, but also of sacrifice. Many who saw the All-Father in their sleep did not live to enjoy their triumph. It was said that Odin chose his warriors through dreams, marking them for Valhalla long before their final battle. The poet-skald sang of such nights. They said that when the wind rose and torches flickered low, a king might see himself standing on a plain of corpses, hearing the sound of Valkyrie's wings. He would wake with the taste of iron on his tongue, knowing that fate had already drawn its sword. There is one story of King Harald Hardrada, who before his final battle at Stamford Bridge dreamed of a woman tall, pale, wearing armor that glimmered like frost. She was one of Odin's own shield maidens, and she offered him a cup of mead. When he drank, it turned to blood. She said only, "You have drunk your last toast, King of Norway." He woke, laughed, and went to war. He died that day, pierced by an English arrow. Those who buried him said he had already met his destiny in sleep. For kings, dreams were instruments of power. They were used to command loyalty, to shape myth, to justify conquest. A dream could become law. If a ruler claimed the gods had shown him victory, none would follow, believing themselves part of a divine design. Even failure could be sanctified. The gods desired my death, a dying lord might whisper, and who am I to deny them? Thus did dreams write the sagas as much as swords did. But there were darker dreams, the ones no king would confess. Dreams of guilt, of the slain returning. Dreams of feast halls filled with ghosts. These were called drum or blow, the blood dreams. In them, a man would see the faces of those he had betrayed, brothers, rivals, old friends, sitting silently beside him at a banquet. He would reach for his cup and find it full of blood. When he woke, his mouth would taste of iron, and the shadows in his hall would seem longer. Such dreams, the seers said, were the price of ambition. The wise kings listened. The foolish ones ignored them, and paid. The sagas are full of warnings turned to ruin. A dream of a broken crown became rebellion. A dream of wolves feasting in the throne room preceded assassination. The gods spoke clearly, men refused to hear. Yet not all royal dreams were doomed. Some were gentle, even holy. In the twilight of paganism, when the old gods were fading and the cross had begun its slow spread through the north, new dreams came. Kings saw figures robed in light, speaking not of war but of mercy. They woke uncertain, torn between worlds, the ancient and the new. Some built churches where they had once built shrines, saying, "This is where the dream told me to stand." Thus did the Viking age dream itself into transformation. Still, the old fear remained. The idea that sleep opened the door between crown and chaos, that through dreams, the gods reminded even kings that they were mortal. No man rules the night, the skald said. In dreams, we are all thralls. Imagine it, a great hall at midnight, the fires dimmed, the banners still. The king lies awake, listening to the breath of his men, to the sigh of wind through the rafters. He fears to close his eyes. He knows the gods wait on the other side of sleep, ready to whisper what he cannot bear to hear. When he finally surrenders, he sees himself upon a field of mist, his crown fallen beside him, the ravens circling low. And somewhere in the dark a voice, neither kind nor cruel, says, "Remember what you are." He wakes before dawn, heart heavy, and steps out into the cold. The horizon is red, like a wound opening. The dream is still there, just behind his eyes. He knows the truth now, that power is only borrowed, that all crowns rust, that even kings walk the same road as beggars when they dream. The sea, the land, the gods, all demand their due, and in the end, perhaps the dream is their way of collecting it. They called her the Dream Maiden. Others whispered her name only in private, Volva, the seeress, the woman who walked between worlds. In the north, when men feared the future, they sought her out, for she carried the gift and the curse of dreamsight. Her sleep was not rest but revelation. You can imagine her, wrapped in a cloak of rough wool, staff in hand, eyes pale as winter moonlight. She came to the villages at night, when the fires burned low, when even warriors softened their voices. People brought her offerings, bread, ale, silver, a lock of hair, anything that might please the spirits that haunted her dreams. The Volva did not dream as others did. Ordinary sleep took a person's hugger, the mind, the self, and sent it wandering. But hers went further, beyond the realm of men, to the hidden places between the worlds. When she lay down beneath her bearskin, she whispered to Odin, to Freya, to Hel herself. She asked them for visions, for truth wrapped in symbols. And they answered. Her dreams were landscapes of meaning. A forest where the trees bled sap like tears meant betrayal. A storm without thunder spoke of war. A raven eating fire was a sign that kings would fall. She woke with the taste of ash on her tongue, and the smell of death in her hair. Once, It is said, a chieftain came to her with trembling hands. He had dreamed of a serpent coiling around his hall, its eyes bright as embers. In the dream, he tried to cut it, but each stroke only made it grow larger. He begged the seeress for an explanation. She closed her eyes and said, "The serpent is your own blood. It will devour what you build." Within 3 winters, his sons fought over his inheritance, and the hall burned to the ground. In Viking lands, women like her were feared as much as they were revered. The Volva was untouchable, a servant of the unseen, a keeper of riddles. Men bowed to her power but avoided her gaze. They said her eyes could turn truth inside out, could see the thread of a man's death woven into his shadow. But she was also a voice of compassion. When mothers lost their children to sickness, they came to her and asked, "Do they still walk in dreams?" The seeress would smile, close her eyes, and say, "Yes. They sleep beneath Yggdrasil's roots, where no cold wind can find them." For in Norse belief, the dead were never far. They lingered in the borderlands of night, whispering through dreams to those they loved. Some Volvers spoke of their own doom. The most famous of them all appears in the Velaspa, the prophecy of the seeress. In that poem, Odin himself wakes a dead woman from her grave to demand knowledge of the world's fate. She tells him what no god wants to hear, that everything will end, the sun swallowed, the gods slain, the world drowned in fire and ice. She dreams of Ragnarok. Her voice trembles through the ages. I saw the earth rise a second time, out of the ocean, green once more. The eagle flies over waterfalls, and the serpent beneath. Even as she spoke of the end, she foresaw renewal. For the Norse did not believe in destruction without rebirth. From the ruins of one world, another would grow. This dual vision, terror and hope entwined, was the mark of the true dreamer. In every settlement, people told stories of the dream woman who foresaw disasters. When ships vanished in storms, when crops failed, someone would whisper, "She warned us." The Volva saw this, and yet her warnings were never enough to change fate. Dreams, in the Viking mind, revealed destiny. They did not rewrite it. To dream was to glimpse the pattern woven by the Norns, the weavers of fate. To dream deeply was to stand too close to their loom. Some said the seeresses paid a terrible price for their sight. They aged quickly. Their hair turned white before their time. In sleep, they screamed, and when they died, their bodies were buried with their staffs, their charms, and sometimes their cats or ravens, companions of their nightly travels. Even the Christian chroniclers, who scorned pagan magic, wrote of them with unease. They called them witches, but their tone betrayed fear, not contempt. Imagine a night in a windswept village 1,000 years ago. The seeress lies awake, unable to escape her visions. She sees the mountains split, the seas boil, the gods themselves falling like stars. She knows she cannot change what she sees, only speak it aloud, so that others might face it with open eyes. When dawn comes, she walks out to the gathering place and raises her voice. The world you know will end, but from its ashes another will rise. Dream not in fear, but in remembrance. Her words ripple through the generations, for even now, centuries later, the image of the dreaming seeress endures. Artists, poets, mystics, all return to her, to the woman who dreamed beyond the veil of time. She was not merely a prophet but a mirror held up to the human condition, the desire to know, the terror of knowledge itself. And so, the Vikings feared her not because she lied, but because she told the truth. Her dreams were not illusions, they were revelations of inevitability. To hear her was to confront one's own end. Some said that, in the last days of the old religion, when churches rose where temples once stood, a few Volvers still walked the edges of the northern forests. They dreamed in secret, their visions fading like smoke. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the wind moaned across the snow, people claimed to see her figure cloaked in gray, eyes closed, still dreaming the world's end and its rebirth. For in the north, even prophecy sleeps, but never dies. There came a time when even the bravest among the Norse began to dread the coming of night. Warriors who once charged into storm and steel would now linger by the fire, drinking long after the others had gone to rest, afraid to close their eyes, because they had learned that the dreams which visited them were not only visions, they were intrusions. In the beginning, dreams were accepted as messengers, the way the gods or the dead chose to speak. But slowly among sailors and shield men, a darker belief took root, that dreaming could kill. They called it drowset, dream sickness. Men who slept too deeply and dreamed too vividly often woke weakened, pale, hollow-eyed. Sometimes they did not wake at all. It was said their souls had wandered too far, or worse, had been captured by something that roamed the night. Those who survived such nights spoke of invisible weight pressing upon their chest, of cold hands holding them down, of a face human, but not hovering above them. They could not move or cry out, and when morning came, their strength was gone as if part of their life had been stolen. In the old tongue, they called this visitor Mara, the same root from which the word nightmare would later grow. She was a shadow being, female in form, who rode the sleeping and drained their breath. The Mara was not just a ghost, nor quite a demon. Some said she was the restless spirit of a woman wronged in life. Others that she was a witch who left her body at night to torment those she envied. If a man dreamed of her, it meant she had found a crack in his soul, a weakness she could enter. To be touched by her was to be marked. So the Norse began to fear their own beds. Men slept sitting upright, wrapped in cloaks, swords across their laps. They whispered charms before lying down, drew runes for protection on their doorposts, and burned juniper to keep the Mara away. Yet the fear persisted, for they knew that what they feared was not truly outside them. It came from the same place as their dreams, the mind's own darkness. The seers said that sleep was a journey and every dreamer, a traveler. But journeys are dangerous. Sometimes the spirit wandered too far into Niflheim, the land of mist and shadow, and could not find its way back. Sometimes it stumbled into the halls of the dead, where ancestors called out with honeyed voices, asking the dreamer to stay. Sometimes it fell into the cold arms of the Mara, who would hold it until dawn. And yet, one could not simply refuse sleep. The body demanded it, like the sea demanding its tide. Some warriors tried to cheat it. They would stay awake for days, their eyes red and wild, until they began to see waking dreams, shapes moving at the edge of vision, whispers in the corners of sound. Sleep, denied too long, became its own hunting. There was a story told in the Icelandic West Fjords about a man named Crackle who had vowed never to sleep again after dreaming that his brother's ghost had come to drag him into the earth. For 7 nights, he walked the cliffs, drinking mead, biting his tongue to stay awake. On the 8th, his knees gave out. When his friends found him the next morning, he was cold, smiling faintly. They said the ground around him was marked with the shapes of hands, as if something had finally pulled him down. To fear sleep was to fear one's own mind. The Vikings knew this, though they had no word for nightmare disorder, no talk of psychology. They spoke instead of Huger and Hammer, of spirits escaping their bodies and becoming prey. To them, fear of dreams was not weakness, it was wisdom, for the dream world was a place of truth, and truth could destroy as easily as it could guide. Some claim that Odin himself had warned them. Dream lightly, the god was said to whisper through the leaves of the world tree, "Dream too deep, and you may not return." This warning carried weight, for even the All-Father's power came from dreams, from visions and trance, from hanging 9 nights on Yggdrasil to learn the runes. The line between knowledge and madness, between revelation and ruin, was as thin as frost on a blade. To protect themselves, the Norse developed rituals of waking. When rising from sleep, one was not to speak at once or look into a mirror, for the soul might still be wandering. A sudden call or reflection could startle it, trapping it in the other world. People touched the ground, whispered their names aloud, or drank cold water to anchor themselves in the living room. Children were taught to sleep with iron near their beds, a knife or nail because iron repelled the mar. Women hung woven charms shaped like suns or spirals to confuse her. In some households, the eldest would stay awake through the darkest hours, watching over the sleepers as if guarding them from thieves. But fear of dreams did more than shape superstition. It changed how people understood fate. Once a dream was a message from the gods. Now, it was also a test, a doorway through which danger could pass. The night itself became a battlefield between will and surrender. Even the skalds, poets who once sought dreams for inspiration, grew cautious. They began to speak of the drama as gifts that burned the hand that held them too tightly. To dream too clearly, one wrote, is to wake too soon. And yet, there were always those who could not resist. Some chased their dreams despite the danger, seeking visions of lost love, of treasure, of the dead who might forgive them. They drank herbs that deepened sleep. They lay beneath the open sky, whispering to Odin for sight. Many never woke. For the Vikings, the world was always a place of boundaries. Land and sea, life and death, light and dark. Dreams stood between them all. To fear dreaming was not merely superstition. It was acknowledgement of the vastness that waited beyond human understanding. Sleep was a small death, and each return from it a rebirth. And so the northern nights grew heavier. Men whispered before lying down, "Let my soul return." Women prayed over their children's cradles. The bravest warriors, who feared no sword, feared the weight of unseen hands. The dream had become the enemy. Yet even in their fear, they knew to live without dreams would be to live without the gods, without story, without soul. And so they slept anyway, trembling, surrendering themselves to that ancient passage, from waking to darkness, because in the end, even fear was part of fate. In the cold northern nights, dreams often carried the dead among the living. The Vikings believed that the veil between life and death thinned under the cover of darkness, and that the spirits of ancestors, both revered and restless, could enter the dreams of those still breathing. Such encounters were feared as much as they were honored, for the dead did not always come with gentle guidance. You lie in your bed, wrapped in wool, the fire guttering low. Somewhere a raven calls in the dark. Then you see a figure, familiar yet impossible. A grandfather long buried appears with eyes that gleam like iron. He does not speak. Instead, he points, and the memory of his voice echoes in your chest, warning, commanding, haunting. You wake gasping, the room still, the hearth cold. The presence lingers, a shadow at the edge of your heart. Such dreams were called dromardau, dreams of the dead. They could take many forms. Sometimes the spirit would appear as it had in life, a familiar face, a hand extended in warning. Sometimes it appeared as a beast, a pale wolf or black crow, symbols of the soul's journey. A dead father might dream to a son of hidden treasure, or to a daughter of an imminent marriage. But the dead could also come to exact punishment. A man might see the face of a slain enemy, knowing that his own death would follow in turn. The Velaspa speaks of the dead speaking through dreams, as if to remind the living that fate is a river flowing through generations. Ancestors who had died honorably, or violently, were said to have influence over their descendants. To dream of them could reveal forgotten debts, unresolved feuds, or blessings of protection. Some families would consult the seers after such dreams, seeking clarity. One tale tells of a fisherman named Bjorn. He dreamed of his father, who had died at sea years before, standing on the cliffs, pointing to a storm cloud rolling over the fjord. Bjorn woke, knowing that a fishing voyage would end in disaster. He warned the crew, and they stayed ashore. The storm struck as he had seen. His dream had saved them, but also left him restless, for he had glimpsed the power of the dead and feared their gaze. Not all encounters were so benign. Dreams of the dead could carry illness or misfortune. People would wake with chills, sores, or sudden fatigue. Sometimes, if the spirit was vengeful, it could strike the sleeper in the night, leaving them to waste away, pale as the snow, until the seeress intervened with charms, herbs, or incantations. The dead also carried messages of inheritance. A deceased chieftain might appear to declare a son worthy of leadership, or to curse another who had failed him. Marital disputes, property claims, and clan rivalries were all reflected in these nocturnal visitations. People took such dreams seriously. To ignore them was to invite disaster. To act on them could secure survival or power. In some sagas, even the gods themselves used the dead to convey prophecy. Odin is said to have summoned a Vailva from her grave, asking her to recount the fates of gods and men. Her answers, delivered in visions that might have been dreams or trances, shaped the destiny of kings and warriors alike. The living and the dead were bound in a constant dialogue, a network of shadows and whispers that existed beyond mortal reckoning. Dreams of the dead were also a mirror. They reflected the dreamer's own fears and desires. A warrior might see fallen comrades urging him to courage or accusing him of cowardice. A mother might see children long gone, reminding her of mortality and the responsibilities that remain. To face such dreams required courage. To ignore them was peril. The Norse did not merely fear these dreams, they respected them. Sleep was understood as a liminal space, a place where the living might encounter the echoes of their ancestors. Those who embraced the visions often became wise, attuned to omens and portents. Those who resisted too fiercely could be haunted, living half in fear and half in sleep, never finding rest. In every household, people whispered protective charms before sleep, hung runes near beds, or placed iron under the pillow. Children were taught to speak the names of ancestors aloud before closing their eyes, to honor the dead and claim safe passage through the night. Even the bravest warriors prayed to the fallen, asking for guidance and protection. And yet, there were some who sought the dead in dreams deliberately. Seers, poets, and chieftains would sleep on burial mounds, calling to the spirits of the long dead. They did not always return unscathed. Their nights were filled with shadows, voices, and visions that could leave a mark on the mind, bending the dreamer toward insight or madness. To the Vikings, the presence of the dead in dreams was a reminder that life and death were intertwined. The boundary was thin, permeable. What happened in dreams mattered. They shaped decisions, foretold battles, and guided entire clans. And for anyone who had glimpsed the dead, awake or asleep, there was no forgetting. The ancestors were always watching, always whispering, always present. In the silence of the northern night, when the wind howled through the rafters and the snow pressed against the walls, one could feel the weight of generations in every dream. To sleep was to walk among the living and the dead alike, and to wake was to carry their voices forward into the waking world. In the northern lands, every dreamer carried the shadow of destiny within them. The Vikings believed that dreams were not random illusions but threads tugged by the Norns, the weavers of fate. Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, the three sisters who spun the past, present, and future, watched over all, and in sleep, their whispers could reach even the bravest warrior. Sleep was a portal. The dreamer's mind became a loom, and the images that rose were threads drawn from the tapestry of the cosmos. A crow overhead, a burning hall, a blackened sword, all were fragments of the weave, each carrying meaning. The most skilled seers could interpret these patterns, connecting symbols across nights and seasons. But the Norns were not gentle teachers. They offered clarity only in riddles, warning only in paradox. There was a saying among the skalds, "He who dreams deeply may glimpse what even Odin fears to know." To dream too clearly could bring wisdom or madness. A man might see the outcome of a battle before it began, yet be powerless to alter it. A woman might learn the fate of her family, yet her knowledge could bring suffering, not salvation. The Norns' threads could neither be cut nor tied at will. Some dreams were small, personal hints. A raven swooping over the fields might warn of death in the family. A spilled horn of mead might indicate discord among kin. Others were vast and terrifying. Warriors reported visions of the sky splitting in fire, of the world tree shaking to its roots, of the ocean swallowing the shores. These were the dreams that hinted at Ragnarok, the end of gods and men. The Vikings believed that fate could sometimes be influenced by interpretation. A dreamer might lay out runes after a night's visions, or consult a Vailva to understand the messages hidden in the symbols. Yet the guidance of the Norns was never direct. They offered glimpses, puzzles, and signs, and only the wisdom of the living could read them without misstep. Misreading a dream was considered dangerous. A misinterpreted omen could bring war, famine, or death. Even kings and jarls were subject to the threads of fate. Harald Fairhair, in his youth, is said to have dreamed of a mighty tree whose roots spread across Norway. The seer interpreted it as a sign he would unify the land. But in the dream, one branch was blackened, a warning of the struggles to come. Harald's life fulfilled both prophecy and caution, for he conquered and ruled, yet bloodshed followed wherever he went. Dreams of the Norns were not only for the living. Sometimes the dead spoke through them, urging the dreamer toward duty or warning of curses. These encounters were layered, complex, and often terrifying. The seeress could help to untangle them, but even she could not always protect the dreamer from the weight of destiny. A particularly vivid story tells of a young warrior named Eirik. One night he dreamed of standing on a cliff, the wind tearing at his cloak. Below, a serpent coiled around the fjord, and at its mouth lay a horn overflowing with blood. Eirik awoke shaken and ran to the village seeress. She told him the serpent represented a cycle of vengeance in his family, the horn a warning of impending battle. He heeded her counsel, yet years later, he would find himself entangled in the very feud he had tried to avoid. The Norns' message had come true, though its meaning had been partially hidden. The concept of fate permeated every aspect of Norse life. Dreams were their primary window into this unseen order. Even small events were read with care: a child's first sleep, a merchant's rest before a voyage, a warrior's slumber before battle. No moment of rest was trivial, for each dream could carry a message, a thread to follow, or a warning to heed. Some seers developed elaborate systems to interpret these messages. They combined visions with runes, with the positions of the sun and stars, with omens in animals, and the weather. Yet no method guaranteed understanding. Fate was mutable only in appearance. The weave could seem altered by a dreamer's actions, but its ultimate course remained inviolate. To the Vikings, the fear of fate and the fear of dreams were inseparable. To close one's eyes was to step into a realm where gods and dead, past and future, intertwined. Every vision carried weight. Every shadow was significant. The bravest warriors and wisest rulers all acknowledged that the most perilous battlefield lay not in the world of men, but in the mind of the sleeper. And so they slept with vigilance, laying protective charms around their beds, whispering prayers to Thor, Odin, and Freya. They sought the guidance of the Vailva, respecting her knowledge of the Norns' patterns. They listened, interpreted, and acted, always aware that the threads of fate were fragile, interwoven, and far-reaching. Even in centuries to come, the echoes of these beliefs persisted. To the Vikings, to dream was to confront the loom of existence itself. It was to touch the threads that bind the cosmos, to glimpse the hidden order, and to carry forward the knowledge that every choice, every breath, every step resonates through the tapestry of all things. For the Vikings, life and death were inseparable from battle. To die in combat was to gain honor, to join the ranks of heroes in Valhalla. Yet even when no enemy stood at the door, the mind could conjure war in sleep. Dreams of battle were feared almost as much as they were revered, for they carried warnings, prophecy, and the echoes of ancestors' blood. A warrior's dream was a battlefield unto itself. He would lie in his hall, muscles tired from the day's labors or raids, and the drum of unseen hooves would begin. Metal clashed, horns sounded, and the air filled with the cries of the fallen. Often, he would see himself as both combatant and observer, facing foes that were known and unknown, allies and enemies alike, living men and restless spirits. Some dreams foretold actual conflict. A jarl might see a hall set aflame or a sword striking a kinsman, and soon a feud or raid would unfold as if the vision had prepared the path. Others were tests of courage. A man might face a phantom horde, only to awaken with the heart pounding, the sweat of exertion, and a sense of readiness for the day's real threats. These dreams were considered a gift from Odin, who inspired warriors through visions to steel them for battle. There were recurring symbols. Blood-soaked fields often meant a battle would cost many lives. The appearance of wolves or ravens indicated the slaughter of men, for these creatures followed the path of death. A dream of a broken shoe was interpreted as an omen of personal vulnerability, perhaps of betrayal or failure. Conversely, a shining sword in sleep might promise victory or honor. Many warriors, particularly young men, deliberately sought such dreams. They lay upon boards carved with runes, drank herb-infused mead, and invoked Odin before sleep, asking for visions that would prepare them for war. It was believed that a dream of valor could make a man fearless in combat, even if the danger he faced was far greater than his imagination could conjure. The saga of Bjorn Ironside recounts one such night. Before a raid on the southern coasts, he dreamed of a longship approaching a burning village. In his vision, the defenders wielded fire and axes. Bjorn fought through the chaos with precision and skill. He awoke with a start, telling his men to be vigilant, to follow the strategies that appeared in his sleep. When they reached the shore, events unfolded almost exactly as he had seen them. The dream had been a guide, a harbinger of tactical insight. Yet not all battle dreams were helpful. Some brought dread, anxiety, and a sense of inevitable death. A warrior might awaken seeing his own blood on the snow, or hearing the mourning cries of women. Such visions were not ignored. Families and leaders took heed, understanding that dreams could reveal vulnerabilities, betrayals, or missteps yet to come. Sometimes, entire armies were touched by these nocturnal visions. Skaldic poems recount nights when many soldiers dreamed the same scene, a burning ship, a horned figure, or a massive wolf stalking the plain. The shared vision created a sense of destiny, binding the warriors' spirits to the outcome, whether it was victory or slaughter. Notably, dreams of battle were intertwined with honor and shame. A man who faced phantoms bravely in sleep was believed to gain courage and acclaim in life. A man who fled in a dream might later falter in reality. The Norse placed as much importance on moral and spiritual readiness as on physical prowess. Dreams were the unseen arena where virtue and valor were tested before the clash of steel in the waking world. The fear of these visions was acute. Some warriors avoided sleep entirely in the nights before major conflicts, drinking and chanting to stave off prophetic terror. Others, more devoted, welcomed the dreams, seeing them as Odin's counsel, a chance to confront fate in advance. To sleep was to train, to dream was to fight, and to wake was to carry both fear and preparedness into the sunlit battlefield. Thus, in the northern lands, the boundary between waking and sleeping, between life and death, was thin. Every dream of war, every vision of blood and valor, was treated as real, as consequential, and as sacred. To ignore them was folly, to heed them was wisdom. And so the Vikings embraced their dreams, even the terrifying ones, knowing that courage was forged not only in the heat of battle but also in the silent terror of the night. The Vikings understood that dreams were not merely nightly distractions, nor harmless flights of fancy. They were sacred, dangerous, instructive, and inescapable. Over centuries, these northern peoples learned to live with dreams as companions, sometimes terrifying, sometimes illuminating, shaping the way they acted, fought, loved, and died. In every hall, people prepared for sleep as they would prepare for battle. The fire was banked, the doors secured, iron laid beneath pillows, charms hung near the beds. Parents whispered names, children were told to speak prayers aloud, warriors drank herb mead to deepen or clarify visions, and seeresses moved silently among the sleepers, watching for signs. Sleep was ritualized, because dreams were portals to other realms. But living with dreams required more than ritual. It required interpretation, courage, and humility. The Vikings learned to record visions, orally in memory through song. Skalds and storytellers captured dreams of kings, warriors, and commoners alike, transforming them into narratives that could teach and warn. Even the humblest thrall who had a powerful vision was valued, for insight from the night could avert disaster or inspire bold deeds. Dreams taught preparation. If the sea appeared dark and stormy in sleep, ships were repaired, provisions increased, and voyages postponed. If wolves prowled in a vision, hunters and warriors were vigilant. If ancestors appeared, guidance was sought, and advice followed. No dream was dismissed lightly, for the Norse knew that the gods and the Norns spoke through sleep, and fate often arrived cloaked in shadow and metaphor. Yet the gift of dreams was not only caution. They inspired bravery, creativity, and devotion. A warrior who dreamed of valor saw himself victorious before battle. A poet glimpsed the threads of stories and songs that would survive centuries, and a mother dreamed of protection for her child. Even the bleakest visions could be reframed. A dream of fire might become a warning of destruction or a sign of purification. The Norse embraced ambiguity, seeing in every dream both danger and guidance. Community strengthened around dreams. Villages consulted seeresses together. Kings sought counsel from Velver. Warriors shared visions to strategize for raids and battles. Families interpreted omens collectively, honoring ancestors and protecting the living. Dreams were communal as much as they were personal. They linked generations, shaped decisions, and guided lives. Importantly, the Vikings recognized the psychological weight of dreaming. Fear, courage, grief, and longing all traveled through sleep. To confront these emotions in visions was to practice mastery in life. Dreams were a mirror of the soul, reflecting not only the external world but also internal struggles. A man or woman who learned to face nightmares gained wisdom and resilience. In this way, sleep became training, preparation for life, death, and the unknown. Odin, who himself hung from Yggdrasil for 9 nights to gain the runes, was the ultimate model for the power of dreams. If the All-Father could endure visions of fate, chaos, and knowledge beyond mortal comprehension, then so could men and women. Dreams, no matter how terrifying, were participation in the great cosmic order, a connection to the divine and the eternal. Finally, dreams reminded the Vikings of mortality and legacy. To dream of the wolf age, of ancestors, or of war, was to confront the transient nature of life. Yet it was also to recognize the threads that continued beyond death, children's stories, lineage, memory. In their dreams, the Vikings encountered endings and beginnings, ruin and renewal. They understood that fear was inseparable from courage, that death was inseparable from life, and that to live fully was to honor the messages carried in sleep. So, in the last moments of night, when the wind rattled the roof, when the hearth glowed faintly, and when shadows stretched long across the wooden walls, the Norse slept with eyes closed but hearts awake. They journeyed through worlds unseen, conversed with gods and dead, glimpsed destiny, and returned with knowledge, courage, and reverence. Their dreams were never merely dreams. They were guidance, challenge, and communion. They were warnings and blessings. They were life itself, distilled into the silent hours of the night. And through them, the Vikings learned to live not only with the unknown but with the truths hidden in every shadow, every star, and every beating heart. In the end, the Vikings feared their dreams because their dreams were real as the sun, the sea, the gods, and the inexorable march of fate. And by fearing them, listening to them, and learning from them, they became wise in the way only those who confront the night can ever be.